Sibley is going to give us a little talk about telephone and telegraph insulators and an overview.
Okay. Before I do that, I want to tease you a little bit with tube business first. I've got a small exhibit here, strange and weird tubes. So that's the meaning you might want to call through those. There's some very queer RCA experimental stuff there, some German Army types, various strange civilian tubes and so on. Just worth calling that for a moment. Another brief tube item goes like this. RCA used to do tube manuals, and in particular in the 60s they published a thing called TT5, transmitting tubes manual number 5. This was the classic book. Every radio editor had one of these and so on. And they're available in reprint form today for about $12.95 from People Electronic Supply and so on. Good basic stuff. Okay, before TT5 there was TT4 back in the 50s. And it's the same basic material, obviously, transmitting tubes. There are a few of these around. They're not super rare. Going back earlier than that, there was TT3 from the 30s. And if you look hard, you can occasionally find one of these. They're still around. I think there may have been a reprint on this also. I'm not sure. Beyond that, how many of you ever seen a TT2? A little scarcer. This came out in 1934. Unlike these, which are pointed mainly to the ham community, this was pointed toward the broadcast world. So it calls itself water-cooled transmitting tubes and certain air-cooled tubes and so on. TT2s are quite scarce because the hams got another book that was pointed toward them with the air-cooled stuff.
I used to own a TT2.
Oh, giraffe. Congratulations.
10 months.
Now, I have never seen this myself till last fall when I managed to borrow a copy. Therefore, xerography has taken place. The tube program has half a dozen copies, and if you want a copy yourself, see the tube down. But there is a TT2 around. TT1 I don't think ever existed. Okay, let's do some insulator stuff. I will confess to you, I am a reformed insulator collector from years past. Back in the 60s, there were still a lot of open wire telegraph and telephone lines crossing the country. The railroads hadn't yet started tearing them down. There was still a Western Union Telegraph Company that was still heavily using open wire. AT&T hadn't yet started snuffing its open wire lines much. So in the 60s, things were more or less as they had been for generations before. It came the end of the 60s, the lines started coming down. And since there are 40 pairs of insulators per mile on an open wire line, there were an awful lot of insulators floating around. People realized these might be collectible. They realized there were multiple colors and brands and shapes and all kinds of possibilities. So insulator collecting grew up as a sort of late 60s hobby. It's sort of analogous to collecting barbed wire or collecting beer cans. So people will collect anything. And in the case of insulators, there is a fair amount of electronic history associated with them if you go looking. There were a couple of authors who dug out the histories of insulator companies. The Alan Douglas of Insulators, as it were, was a guy named Woodward who wrote a nice book in 1973 with company histories. So a lot is known about insulators, and there has been a fairly vibrant hobby of dealing with them. There's a monthly magazine called Crown Jewels of the Wire that deals with insulators. There's a whole set of literature, books and pamphlets and so forth. Dealers, meets, the whole shit nuts, just like with radio. Like any purely collecting hobby, it's a little sterile in that there's no hands-on aspect like there is with radio. Tom Provost can take 3 ruined magical HR rails and put them together and get one good one. There's a hands-on angle to it that you don't have in a purely collecting hobby. But insulator collecting is a fairly popular business. Historically, for us New Jersey people, there's a fair amount of New Jersey involvement because, of course, this state historically had a strong glass industry dating back to the colonial times. And so one of the country's major producers was, in fact, in Old Bridge. Let me start by handing out the handout. And this will give you a basic splash of what this stuff is all about. There were hundreds, thousands of styles and shapes of insulator. I captured only 9 of them here, but these are some of the more interesting ones. Naturally, if there's to be a collecting hobby, that hobby has to devise a classification system for insulators. So sure enough, there are numbers assigned to the various styles. A coal type insulator like this one is a CD121. Consolidated design number 121. So there is a memory system among the insulator freaks that can handle this sort of stuff. Historically, it all began with the telegraph world in the 1850s. And the very first insulators were threadless. This guy is before about 1860, perhaps. It has no thread down the center, and it was cemented onto a pin on the bone. So threadless is the big time as to really insulators. This one has no company name embossed on it. It's a simple little dark green glass guy, but it's the rarest one in the bunch here. A major technological breakthrough came in 1865 when out came a patent for putting screw threads up the middle. And that screw thread concept struck the industry. That was obviously the major advance. So everything else you see here was false. We had in New Jersey, beginning about then, and running up into 1922, the Brookfield Glass Company in Old Bridge. Their sales offices were in New York City, but the factory was here. And their stuff has this typical sort of light blue color. You can almost always recognize a Brookfield insulator right across the flea market by its color in the sun. These guys are from the 1880s, but they lasted to much later times with other colors. The other guys in the industry, the other big time people, were the Hemingway Glass Company of Muncie, Indiana. Not Hemingway, Hemingway, it turns out. They lasted up until the 60s, I guess, and produced hundreds of styles and billions of individual insulators. Let me talk you through some basic types here. As with any hobby, there's a whole hierarchy of values on these things. Let me show you a commercial success of the values today. Hemingway introduced a style called the 42. Now this was about a 1950 or 1920 design, but they made them all up to the end. This guy has double petticoats. There's actually a second insulator inside the skirts of the first one. And these things are put out by the millions. The railroads sucked them up, AT&T, everybody. So today, as you go on the old railroad rights of way, you'll find these things still up on the pole. The trouble is, this is a highly successful design as an insulator, but of course it's worthless because it's so common. This is the 6SN7 of the insulators, as it were. But it's a good honest piece, and it's nicely done. Hemingway came out in 1893 with a patent for what he called drip points, which are these little nubs on the bottom of the skirt. These are supposed to help the insulator dry itself faster after a rainfall. Now, whether they really work is sort of debatable, but it was a nice sales point anyway. The very first ones had sharp drip points, the later ones had rounded drip points that don't break as easily. Let's spread some of these around just for grins. Pass them around, please. This is the Hemingway number 40. Hemingway and Brookfield both made each other's products, so you'll find the same stuff by Brookfield. But this guy is another double petticoat guy with drip points. And I believe these were the ones used on the AT&T transcontinental telephone line in 1914. So we got across the Nevada desert, they use these things. Nice little collectible, not valuable, but they're fun. And these always look nice up against the window with the sunshine. So it's a good honest stuff. Let's spread these around too, please. One of these is actually literally a Brookfield without drip points. This one has sharp Hemingway drip points. Okay, another popular style is today called the beehive, strangely enough. These are Brookfield beehives, and they have no drip points. They date from perhaps 1915. The phone people didn't use these much, but the telegraph people certainly did. You'll find these commonly in the big projects here. Okay. Another style you commonly see is called the signal insulator. These are commonly used on fire alarm lines or low voltage AC power distribution or just general purpose functions like that. The telegraph guys and the phone guys didn't use it much for one reason or another. Just a matter of custom. This is a good thing. When the telegraph business merged into the telephone industry in the 1880s and 90s, there was a need for small, cheap insulators to use on farmer phone lines. So out comes the pony insulator. These are two little guys. They're both Brookfields, and widely used on rural farm lines, and used into the 20s, I guess, probably. Good basic stuff. Beginning in the 1890s, there was a need for a relatively sophisticated insulator to use on long-distance telephone lines. So out came a style called toll. This happens to be a Hemingway product, but there were lots of these in Boston AT&T. And when I worked at AT&T, this was a great thing to hand out as desk paper with good basic collectible.
How was the bare wire attached to an insulator?
Okay, it goes past, and a tie wire is wrapped around the insulator and secured to the line wire. So you have to untie the tie wire to change the insulator when it's broken. That's the basic deal. Anyway, these things lasted only until about the 20s, and then they became obsolete and came with other designs. To replace the Sony, it was a little more elegant thing. This happens to be a white altatum farm line insulator. White altatum was in Millview, New Jersey, and they lasted into at least the 70s, doing various kinds of glassware. The insulator manufacturers were also manufacturers of mason jars, soda bottles, medicine bottles, general purpose glassware like that. In fact, one of the glass manufacturers, the Hawley Glass Company in Jeanette, Pennsylvania, is famous for doing impression glass glassware. But among insulator collectors, it's also a big time. Anyway, this is a little later version that's a little more sophisticated.
Did you ever make any incredible glass?
Oh yeah, there were. They're not common, and they seem to have been used for AC power lines. But yeah, they're collectible, desirable stuff. One of the freaky things about the insulator business is that if a glass company was making dishes, at the end of the day, they'd have end-of-the-day glass, miscellaneous colors, and that sort of stuff. And they would merge their leftover glass into insulators until it was all used up. So you can get freaky colors sometimes that weren't really intended. Yes, there were indeed. There were milk glass insulators also used on power lines. This is not milk glass, this is porcelain. And there's a whole separate hobby of porcelain collecting, which is a different set of people who don't talk to glass guys much. But there's a whole historic basis of porcelain collecting. Here's a brown glazed porcelain. These are both anonymous, but they're both sort of fun. Oh gee, 1880s and later, I guess. And used primarily with the power industry rather than telephone. There were railroad telegraph lines with porcelain insulators, but they're relatively unusual. There are a couple more white altatum products from Millview. These are 20th century, probably 30s or later guys, made out of clear glass. What you see on most of those green guys is the basic cheap glass that sold in 1920. The green comes from iron ions in the glass, which gives it the famous color. By contrast, in later times, they knew how to make cheap glass that was clear, so that's what these are. What's that blue in there? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Okay. To make cheap glass clear, it was possible to add manganese compounds, which would knock out the green color. And this guy started out as a clear insulator once upon a time. But exposed to sunlight, the manganese ion would disassociate and give you a purple color. So this is officially sun-colored amethyst, but that's about it. This is a telegraph insulator company. It's labeled GNW Telco, the Great Northwest Telegraph Company. Yes.
This one says like 1-44.
That's a date killer. Yeah. You occasionally find date killers in the later ones, and that's some guy. The early guys were always anonymous. Anyway, yeah, this is a classic beehive telegraph insulator, but done in a different kind of glass. This is another single type insulator. This is a Brookfield without grip points. Again, get another shape out of hundreds. And going back to these two Brookfields, these little cheap Brookfields that are more or less valueless in the collector world actually are a lot of fun because they're chatty. On each of these, there are 3 different patent codes. Now, this one, the earliest patent date is 1865. That's the threads patent. On the back side is given the address for Brookfield. It says W. Brookfield Company, 55 Fulton Street, New York. And knowing that, this was made before 1882. So there's no commercial value here, but it's a lot of fun. That's the magic of it. By contrast, there is substantial commercial value to these threadless guns. Now, we had Isaac Wander one time told you all about his 50-cent Catalan radio. Well, at my local redneck Monday night box lot auction, there was a beer flat with this thing in it. The beer flat went for $5. So you occasionally score. That's the basic deal. A couple of hundred back in the 70s. I don't know what it's been.
That's no appreciating value.
I guess so.
It's like the,
I don't know. There's active trading of this stuff on the eBay auction process on the internet. And I've seen some extraordinarily nice 1860s insulators go for $75 a piece on eBay. So there are bargains out there. Anyway, that's pretty much the basics. You also got insulators made out of rubber, this black rubber compound with wax embedded in it. Those are Western Union specials from the 50s, 1950s. Or you'd find in very late times, like the late 60s, there was some plastic ones, simple polycarbonate plastic, which really was great stuff. It was light and cheap and somewhat resistant. You could shoot bullets through it and you didn't care, no problem. If that had been around 50 years earlier, we wouldn't have plastic insulators. There was also a sulfur insulator in the 1860s. Let's make an insulator by taking a cast iron cup. We'll pour it full of molten sulfur, and we'll stick a hook down the center of the sulfur. This hook will hold the line wire. We'll mount this thing upside down, so the hook hangs down and grabs the line wire, and the insulation is actually provided by the sulfur. Now, these were used on the Union Pacific Railroad out in the West, and they have been found in recent times. They're highly rare. So there's a whole hierarchy of these things. Anyway, that is pretty much the basics of this hobby. John?
I was up to the AWA Museum this past weekend, and I was staying in a motel in Victor, which is about 5 miles up the street, closer to the highway, 90. And there's a company in Victor, they had their big garage doors open when I drove by, the Victor Insulator Company. And they make insulators for electric lines and high frequency, high power antennas, because Pete was with me. The AT&T radio site, and he's actually bought insulators from that company. And they had the panels on them, so they were about this big around and ceramic. They kind of taper in.
Oh, sure enough.
So they're still making them today.
Yeah, Victor was a critically important manufacturer of push-and power insulators at the turn of the century. A real pioneer when high voltage was 32 kilovolts. And they made, for example, for the high voltage lines coming out of Niagara Falls, they made some very early important insulators.
They're still there.
Okay, fair enough. Well, hey, power lines are still there, and they still need this stuff.
Generally speaking, what was the last time the telegraph was a viable way of communicating? The last functioning time when you could send a telegram?
Western Union started having their message volume fall off every year after 1945, reliably, consistently, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. They were still in the telegraph business in the late 70s, I think. Yeah, but I'm talking about public telegram service where you want to send, fill out the yellow form and send your friend. Late 70s, maybe?
It's actually surprising they survived that long.
Yeah.
Why would they, in the face of telephones being everywhere, why would they have survived that long?
The impact of a telegraph. It's a record. It stands out in the mind of the receiver.
I mean, maybe you can have a third party deliver the bad news instead of doing it yourself.
But as the years went by, the big money became, sure enough, telex service, TWX service, leased wires, data transmission, all the modern stuff. Today, Western Union is shriveled to being this dumb money order company. They're totally out of the comm business. But they lasted a long time on other things in telegraph.
The Bell system had the best and sold as part of their teletype network.
Yeah.
One time they were forced to sell it for the record.
Yeah. At one time, there was TWX service, dial telegraph, that the Bell system provided, which competed with Western Union's telex. So the FCC, in order to help Western Union, ordered the Bell system to stop competing. Let there be no competition. Western Union shall be the provider of dial telegraph service. This is within our lifetime.
So when we say telegraph, when you say up to the 70s, I mean, we're not talking about Morse code. That was way back when.
No, but they would punch tape down at the telegraph office and use a 60-word remote program, teletype machine, sending it.
Up to 66.
Now, from major city to major city, it wasn't a teletype machine or teletype speed. It was done by kilohertz that got stuck in data links. But the fact is, the end link coming into your local small town was a teletype machine. They got smart and automated.
I never thought of that. I come to think of it. Remember those Academy Awards or awards things you saw on TV? And usually somebody came up with a whole bunch of telegrams or, I've got a this is from the president or this is from, and they read it. I mean, how could they say, hey, I got a phone call congratulating you,
Or stop those new dealers in Congress, send a telegram.
Yeah, that's right. So they were around. Now I come to even more
Well, it was only fax that didn't teletype. I mean, I worked in business offices almost into the 80s where we had teletype machines.
And you had to have them so that foreign people could talk to you. Worldwide telex service was important at one time, and they could reach you through the Twix network and telex, as well as your.
And there were issues with you sent a message and you got a receipt of you got a hard copy that you sent it.
Yeah, when you were sending, I used to work in an overseas telex machine, and if you wanted to send something to Japan, you go ahead and send it, even though it was their, they were sleeping at the time, but it would still log in on their machine, and so they did the message first thing in the morning.
You got the answer back, saying they got it. Very handy. Sure enough. I mean, that's the basics on insulator collecting. You will see these in antique shops all the time. You'll see Hemingway 22s labeled $10, and you can smear and walk away. But then you may find something like this. You never know.
What was voltage used on telegraph?
Western Union used a variety of voltages, either 160 or 240 or 320 on the line. This is a little tough for the poor guy who's out there in the rainstorm working on the open wire line. Before he reaches out and grabs the line, but that's what they used.
So the hands used to like to get the teletype machines on the Bell system because they would run 60 words a minute, which is the standard used in the radio. But the Western Union machines were 66 words per minute. Then you had to find a friend in the phone company who could get you a set of 60 words per minute here.
Or mess up the rangefinder until it sort of came in and you could wing it. Question?
Required glass making these insulators?
Absolutely. Yeah. They were the proprietors of Pyrex glass, and that was particularly desirable for high voltage lines. You wouldn't expand or contract and break. It had good dielectric strength, and it was all the things it was, and it was expensive, but it was great for high voltage. And they lasted into the late 30s, I guess, before the ceramic insulators took over. Question?
These insulator guys get excited about the voltage are 3, 4, 2 high.
Some of them do, I guess, yeah. Insulators are fundamentally air movement, so our room insulators weighs tons. Well, I guess there are people crazy enough to talk to big guys.
Yeah, radios are light.
Yeah, that's Any more questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.